the ocean while we're all sitting back. She did not airbrush in the Coronas and umbrella drinks as I requested, so we'll speak of that after the class. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the objectives of this whole session. 401k scripting can be annoying if you don't go about it a certain way. So I've written, I don't want to say countless, but enough scripts that I've kind of learned after a while. There's a pattern and there's a method to the way you should do it that will minimize the number of times you have to redo things. And most of it, the success part of it, is relevant to your preparation. So the first thing you have to do is a thing called information gathering. And in information gathering, you speak to the client as to how the script or what the calculation they want you to do, how it works. You should always get it in writing for two reasons. If they tell you wrong, then you don't have to worry about that you misunderstood them. You did what they said and it was incorrect. That allows you to be in a stronger position of power in dealing with it. You should also request examples from them of the math, information such as that on basically an algebraic representation of how it should go. If A plus B is greater than C, then D, else E, something like that for you folks who are algebra fans. So that's the most important thing, is get a clear description from the client of what it is you want to do. We've been told, everyone probably on the phone, oh, I've got this script and I need it to do this. So we write it to do that, and then they say, oh, but it needs to do this. So you fix it to do the second this, and it continues on. So in order to save yourself grief, frustration, and also since the timing of these events is usually always, oh, I have to get the script in and the payroll's running now. Again, getting concise instructions from the client is important to your own sanity and getting this done quickly and efficiently. The next thing you do, this is regardless, there's two ways to do 401k calculations in M3. One of them is with VBScripting, and the other one which is with the 401k wizard, which is on the 401k tab in the company setup section. So regardless of which mechanism you choose, there's also some other things that you should do. And they're listed here. Create the code groups that you're going to use in the calculation. I use a typical set of code groups, and the reason for that is one of the rules of users of 401k scripting on a regular basis is the fabulous cut and paste. Why rewrite what you can plagiarize? In 401k scripting, plagiarism is the highest form of flattery. So I always establish a couple of code groups, and this is all documented in the presentation and in the Word document that's provided so you don't have to worry about taking notes. I will set up one called 4KDD. That is not named after me. That stands for deductions. And that group contains the 401k deduction code or codes. I like to use code groups in case they add another 401k code that the script needs to consider. That way I can just update the code group instead of updating the script and telling it to look for multiple codes. So it's a little more efficient. I will also have one that's called 4KEE, which stands for eligible earnings. In the majority of companies, 401k eligible earnings are equal to gross, but in a lot of companies they are not. So I typically use 4KEE. So I use these two code groups consistently, so no matter what I'm copying, pasting to use for an incoming request, I know the same terminology. I also recommend that when you call things in the script, scripting is you give everything in the script a name. So eligible earnings, I don't type very well. Eligible earnings is a lot of letters. So when I call eligible earnings, I call it ELIG earns. It's shorter. EE contrib versus employee contribution. I'm very much into short and sweet. So the next thing is a calc code. typically, if you're using a code group, you're going to have a calc code that works from that code group. In Millennium, if you create a code group such as 4KEE, you can create a calc code under the company deductions tab. There's an option for calc codes, and create a new calc code that is simply, the code is the percentage sign 4KEE, and M3 interprets that as a percent of that code group. If you're not intimately familiar with code groups dynamically build up numbers based on what you're telling it to put in the code group. So if the company has 20 earning codes and you want to add up all the overtime codes, you could create an overtime code group with those codes identified. And any place it's referenced in a script, in a report writer, that number is automatically added up and displayed in a report or made available to a script, etc. So they are very cool things. The next thing you should have in place, if the money is going to be paid through Millennium to an agency, is to create the agency check entry on the company setup again. The reason I suggest these things is because whether you're using a script or the wizard, they are questions and things you have to complete, so it's better to get all the prep work out of the way before you start the script or the wizard, so you can just run through it and complete it quickly and efficiently. So all of my pointers are from someone who has done this a lot and fumbled and kind of refined the process. Okay, so let's talk about the 401k wizard a little bit. Now, actually, what I did, because Darla did this presentation so cool, I have talked about these bullets, and there's actually pages about the bullets. So that's what happens when you put the least knowledgeable learning and development person doing the presentation. So in your preparation, I kind of alluded to all of these things as questions that you must ask. But the one important point is, dependent on the answers to these questions, that will make the determination which method you can use. The 401k wizard is actually called it's a simple wizard, so it's pretty much relegated to scripts that, or match calculations that are pretty straightforward. I get 50% of my contribution up to 6% of earnings. That's pretty straightforward. You get plenty where it's tiered. So 100% of the first 3%, 50% of the fourth and fifth, a third of the sixth. I've seen all sorts of very interesting, almost mind-boggling calculations. Once you get beyond a certain level of simplicity, you must use a script because the scripts can be tailored to match those requirements. So if you notice here, there's a series of 8 questions, and there are 4 through 8. If any of these are answered yes, you have to write a script. And that's because the simple wizard will not handle them. The third question is kind of ambivalent to a degree. So these are the questions you ask your client, because this will determine for you which mechanism you're going to use to build the logic into the software. So as I babbled on before, I did talk about these items. So again, 4KEE for the eligible earnings, 4KDD for the deductions, a calc code set, and a company agency. So let's assume we're going to do the simple 401k wizard. Now, forgive me for having to jump around, but if I go into my company and I go to company setup, we have our friend the 401k wizard here. So I'm going to keep jumping back and forth a little bit. So apologize for that. And we'll go here, and we'll make this bigger. Sorry, I'm terrible with this stuff. Maybe I'll work on that. Go ahead. So I'll just leave it like this for the moment. So there's 2 options for the 401k wizard. One is just a straight percentage match, as I mentioned before, where you're saying it's a percent of the employee's contribution up to a percentage of earnings. So 50% of my contribution. In the example on the screen, it's 75% of the employee's contribution up to 3% of earnings. There's another option below it which says the contribution is 75% of the employee's first 3% of earnings. So it's similar words but different math. And again, based on what the client told you in the questions that you've asked them and also in the examples that they've given you, you can decide which one you wish to use. So if you choose option 1, which is the pretty straightforward, let me pop this open here. There we go. I'll learn how to use this thing by the time we're done. If you use option 1, you have, we'll go down here. You're going to have one box available, and that is, this is option 1, where you're saying, I want 50% of the employee's contribution up to 6%. If you use the other one, where you're using a percent of earnings, you can build a tier where you're saying, in this case, we're going to say 100% of the employee's contributions up to 3% of earnings. So the system will do math, determine what 3% of earnings is. Earnings is either gross or the code group 4KEE you've defined, and then it will continue down. So you can do a number of tiers here. Typically, you'll see 2, 3. I've seen 5 and 6, but 2 to 3 is typically the amount you'll deal with if there's tiered logic. So, depending again on what your client's math sample has told you, you have chosen one of these, so you'll be either using option 1 or option 2. Once you get past this decision, the system is identical, and here's where the preparation comes into place. It is asking you what is the match memo code that you want to use, so having it set up allows you to just choose it from the pick list for this field. To define eligible earnings, again, we've already created it, so it's in the pick list, and the same thing with the 401k code or code group. So preparation saves you the trouble of going out of the script, fixing things, or out of the wizard and fixing things, and then coming back in and doing it. So it's all part of the preparation. You don't paint the house until you tape the room. The next tab is where you assign the agency check, if there is one. There are some options on this screen. I actually have never used this one where only employer money goes to agency. So I've never had to actually use that, but that option does exist. What that should mean is that only the match goes there, not the employee's contribution. So at that point, you get to an interesting point in the wizard where you choose the internal 401k match, or you can choose to have Millennium generate a VBScript. And what you would do with that is, if you chose to generate VBScript, is you would actually see one, and you would be able to copy it, paste it into the scripting section of M3, and manipulate it if need be. So at this point, we'll go to the next page, and we have chosen, my apologies, we chose to use the internal 401k match calculation. And you'll get this is what you need to check box at the end. It says all the money is going to the agency Schwab we set up. We're going to use the internal match. And it just basically reminds you to check everything you've done, but because you were efficient and did everything before, everything is in place for this script to work as you expected. So that is the simple match. Let me walk through it in M3, and I'll show you a little the cause and effect. I'm assuming Darla did everything I said as far as preparation, so we're going to go with that. So we're going to go with our 6%, 50% of earnings. So my match is very simple, and I'll be honest with you, I would say 75% of them are no longer simple, as retirement plans and all the rules have evolved. When I started, there was no 401k. So obviously it's evolved a lot. Now there's 401ks, there's simple IRAs, there's Roth IRAs, there's 457s, there's a gazillion different retirement plans. there are safe harbors, which are very similar, look a lot like a 401k, but the logic is different. So again, it depends on what they're saying, but this is a very simple, straightforward 401k match. So I choose next. Thank you, Darla. We already had the match code set up. We should have a code group, or we should if we follow Dennis's instructions. So we'll try putting 4KDE in here. Darla. I'm allowed to give them a hard time. And we'll just use 401k. Now your options are to choose the one code. Again, I recommend the code group in the chance that the client has another 401k code. Some folks, if they're coming from other systems, will have multiple codes. Some of the other softwares out there, you can't do a flat 401k deduction and a percentage 401k deduction in the same code. So you have to have two. Millennium's much more flexible than some of them, so that is not necessary. So in here, I've answered my questions. And I'm going to come up here. Let's see. We'll pay it to Mecklenburg County, where all of my taxes go. I'll click Next. I want to generate the internal VBScript. Now, please note, I'm going to move this over. There's nothing here. This is the 401k screen. It says using VBScript for 401k match or no match is set up. So if you see this on the screen, what that would mean is if there is, in fact, a match, it is set up under the Miscellaneous tab under VBScripting. So if I click Next, it gives me I need to check for my code group. It's going to be paid here. It's going to use the match, etc. And then I click Finish, and you'll note that this is now updated with the logic I just explained. So 6% of the employee's contribution up to 50%. What's the code for the match, what code group, et cetera, et cetera. At any time, I can go back in here and the client will say, oh, I meant to tell you it's only 4%. And I can change that, click right through it again, and finish, and voila, the screen has changed. Now, before I did this, the screen said, using 401k scripting or no match is set up on the company. So if you are using scripting, this section will be blank, and there will be scripting in this section of the company. Now, please note, if you do add a script in here and are remiss about taking this one out, they will both calculate matches. So please be aware that they can all do that kind of stuff. So 401k wizard doesn't say the term simple, but it should. So it's pretty straightforward, very cut and dry. The math is very straightforward. So we'll get out of this one for a second, and I'll go back over here. And then we're going to talk about the next piece of this. I believe Darla sent you the handout that I'm showing you, which is the beautiful sky and grass. And she also sent you a Word document that says one script fits almost all 401k matches. And that is a pretty true statement. It fits almost all of them. What I did when I organized this was, in support, we would get all their requests for a 401k match. And I started, so I would write one, I would send it to the person, and one thing I do suggest anybody who does scripting on a more than infrequent basis, every one you write, save it in a notepad and put it in a folder called 401k matches so you can cut and paste. And the important note I made at the beginning, cut and paste is the highest form of flattery. It's already written, you know it already works. You may have to tweak it a little bit, but the majority of it is done. You can crank out a valid 401k script very quickly just by cutting, pasting, and altering. So the reason I put together this one-size-fits-all script was to hopefully address all of these things, or address most of the requests I got. People would be like, wow, you did that really quick. You must be really good at this. And I'm like, no, I just got a lot of examples. I just cut and paste them. But I'll take credit for being great at it if that's the way they want to go. So the way this works is I have in the document that Darla, the Word document, there is a very long 401k script, and it has 14 sections. Now, if you look at the page here, we have the 14 sections listed. They should remain in the order they are listed. Now, if you remove some, for example, section 2 is optional. You can remove it, but the number, then it would be 1, 3. You always have to keep these numerically sequential, even if you take sections out. And the reason for that is section 1 prepares certain information that could be used in any of the other sections. So you wouldn't want to put 3 before 1, or it will not work. So that's part of the logic. If it says it's optional, that means it depends on the answers to the question that you ask the client. Now, in this section where it says choose 5, 6, or 7, there are 3 what I would call primary types of calculation requests that we get. The one that we did in our simple wizard is a percentage of eligible earnings, and the employee must contribute to it. Now, the reason that one is in here, even though it's a simple one, is so you could see how it works, where besides that simple thing, there's other stipulations, such as the employee must be over 21. You have to work there a year. That's when you have to use a script, because the simple wizard has no provisions in it to allow for that kind of logic. The second one is a match where it's just a percentage of the employee contribution. So again, it's a simple math calc, but you have people requesting this type of calculation with some of these stipulations in it. And then the last one is a staggered match, which is a tiered match based on percentages. So typically, the majority of your requests for a script are going to have, you're going to need to do the first section, but the math itself, high percentage of them will be one of these 3. And it won't be all of them, which is why it says fits almost all of them. There are others you'll have to go outside of the box. So when you're speaking to the client, we want to ask them a lot of questions. Is there a year-to-date match limit? So if there is, then you want to use this section. Is there a month-to-date limit? Very rare, but comes up once in a while. So if there is, you'd use this section. If not, you would not. Is there a tenure requirement? Is there an age requirement? And is it one of those companies where the boss just says, hey, you know, I really like Sally, she gets a match, Steve over there, not so much, to heck with him. So there are situations that come up like that where it's discretionary, not prejudicial, as I made it sound. So then the other part of it is, down at the end, 13 and 14, is what are you going to do with the match? The match script adds entries to the payroll. So one method will just simply add the match to the payroll, and that's all it does. The other section will add the match to the payroll, and it will also tell it to make it available to the agency check that you're going to produce. So with that brief introduction, if you can refer to your Word document, because it is rather long, and it sometimes doesn't display as well as we would like on the screen. So that's the group exercise you're going to do, so I'll skip over that. Okay, so here's the script. Just as a reminder, there are 14 sections. Section 1, if it says it's optional, then it's optional. If it's not optional, you should leave it, and you shouldn't mess with it. Simple as that. Now, you may have to change some of the things in it, and I will explain why. One of the problems with 401k matches as opposed to standard pre-tax retirement deductions is, you all know, if you set up a 401k code, the code automatically knows what the limit is for each year and for the over-under 50 group. We do not have anything yet in M3 that does that, so it doesn't know what the limit could be. So you have to build it in. So each year, the wage limit that some of these calculations are based on may change, so some of these scripts need to be maintained every year. So we're going to talk first about section 1 of the script, and that is this section here. It's not optional, so please don't remove it, because later in the script, several of these items that are listed here are referenced dependent upon what your client says they want to do. So as I mentioned before, we typically are going to need to know what the employee contributed and what their eligible earnings are. So as you'll see here, I use my EE contrib, again, to keep the typing short, and eligible earnings. Now in scripting, you're going to see a lot of different commands. M3 has a series of what are called VB functions that tell the script what to do. So the command get total amounts is a check level command which says go get all of the information about this check that I'm telling you to get. So I am saying for this check itself that the script is looking at, go find what 4KDD the code group says and add up all the components for the check. Now there are other VB functions that actually look at the individual lines of a check. Sometimes you need to do scripting on job costing or things like that where you actually need to look at the check line by line because you're interested in subsets of the check itself. But 401k matches are usually, not usually, I would say 100% of the time based on the check itself. So you'll see items here like get total amount. So I want to know for the check that the script is looking at, what is the total returned by the code group 4KDD, and that shows me how much the employee's contribution is. Now one thing I was remiss in saying is, you'll note this entry here called sub paycheck calculator post-check calculation. There are what MPAY developers call a series of hooks on a sub-paycheck calculator. This is a standard entry. All of them start with sub-paycheck calculator, then it says underscore something. And this part of it is called the hook, and depending on what this says, it tells it where in the check process to do things. So post-check calculation is after the check is completely wrapped up, I want to do the math you're telling me. There are hooks to say, before I do anything, I want to figure out this, that, and that. I want to add earnings based on hours, or I want to do certain things. So there are a number of hooks. But for a 401k match, post-check calculation is always the item. So on other things where you're working with earnings, I've seen this used, and it will actually calculate earnings and create nets if not done properly. So 401k match, this is going to be your item. In here, we're continuing based on the questions that your client may have answered yes or no to. We're setting up what we'll call the basis for some of the math that we do later on. If there is a limit on the 401k match amount, we need to know how much the employee has contributed so far this year. So I have a field called YTD ER match, pretty self-explanatory, and we're telling it to get the current year-to-date amount of this earnings code, so ER match. Excuse me. We also need to know the year-to-date employee contributions dependent on what we're going to do later. So again, year-to-date stands for year-to-date, EE, employee, contrib, go get the year-to-date amount of the 4KDD code group. Same thing here, year-to-date eligible earnings, etc. Match wage limit means how much can I make in a year before the match stops. This is one item that, dependent on changes in the regulations, this may go up. It's been going up, probably gone up about $40,000 in the last 6 or 7 years. So this one is something that clients will have to deal with. So now, Section 2 is optional, and if your client says there is a limit on the wage, then we want to use this section. And what we've done in Section 1 is we've defined what that wage limit is. So this section, if the client says, I don't want this calculation to happen on any wages higher than, in this case, $245,000, we just leave this section in here. And if you look at it, we are creating formula names. Now, from your algebra days, A plus B equals C. Well, A could be white bread plus bologna equals bologna sandwich. You can call these things whatever you want, the formula names. So up here, I could just call this eggs, bacon, etc. But down here, my math would have to say eggs plus bacon equals breakfast, something like that. So there's no preset format to these, but in order for them to make sense to you or someone else down the pike, using descriptions that are short and sweet but relatively easy to understand. If you look at this, it's YTD contrib. Most people would go, okay, that's the year-to-date employee contribution. If I did have bologna sandwich there, they might be wondering what I was talking about. But so it used field names to make them easier to follow your math and your logic. So in this section, we've got a series of steps that basically come up with the eligible earnings if there is, in fact, a year-to-date match limit as defined here. So nothing needs to be changed in this, and you can leave it, or you can get rid of it by just highlighting it and cutting it out of the case. One other thing to note about scripts is any line that has a single quote in front of it, that tells the script to ignore it, so you can make notes to yourself. So for example, here I've got all of this stuff saying what this section does. The script will ignore it. When it's going through, it'll just fly through everything that's here. It'll skip right over this and go right to the next logic, which is the stuff that doesn't have quotes in front of it. So the next section is we calculate the employee's contribution percentage. And this is necessary when you're doing a thing where it says it's 6%, you know, it's you need to know how much the employee's percentage of their contribution is, depending on what the match requirement does. So regardless if this is needed or not down the end, you just leave it in here. And basically what it's doing behind the scenes is looking at the employee's contribution, dividing it into eligible earnings, and rounding it off to 2 positions, and it's coming up with a number like 0.04, 0.05, and it's saying what their percentage. On this employee's deduction screen, it will say the number 5 or 4 or 6.5 or something like that, and here it will be the decimal equivalent of 0.05, 0.04, etc. And later on, it may or may not be used. Now, next section is what we call message boxes. One of the most frustrating things about writing scripts is when it doesn't work, you're like, all right, I told it exactly what I want it to do, and it's not working. Why isn't it listening? So we'll keep doing stuff over and over. And I believe Bridget is one who always quotes, who's saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So in here, we have a series of message boxes. And what a message box is in M3 is a means to display in payroll entry the results that the script is reporting. So I have several of them in here. They have little quotes in front of them, so they wouldn't actually be used, but depending on my level of frustration with the lack of my ability to get it right, I use some of these and I take the quotes off, and it will actually display a box in the middle of the payroll screen with this message and this number. So if I want to see what the employee's contribution is, I'll turn this on by just removing this quote, and when the script runs, it will say pre-tax deduction amount is, and it will display the results from the 4K DD code group on the screen. Under it, I'll also do the same thing. I'll get the eligible earnings, I'll get the employee percentage, I'll get other numbers, and then I can see what the script is actually seeing, which helps me possibly correct my logic, because as I said before, I've written a lot of these, and it's like, why isn't this working? It's perfect, and I need something to tell me what I'm missing. So these are helpful. I'll demonstrate them later in the company, but they are a good tool for a debugging process. They can be annoying because every time you use them, they display all this stuff on the screen, and I'll show you what that looks like as well. So now if you go back to, or if the scripting recap sheet that we provided that shows the 14 sections on one page. Now we're to the point where we're going to choose which calculation we're going to use of the 3 that I've provided. So on that document, there is section 5, 6, and 7. Let me try and get this up here to a point where you can see it all close. Okay, so we'll talk about section 5. So if you're going to use this approach, you have to choose one of the 3 sections. If you don't and leave them all in there, it will perform the math that you tell it in 5, and then it will perform the math that you tell it in 6, and then it will do this stuff in 7, and then 7 is the last one that touched it, so that is the result. Kind of like if you've written GLs, if you tell it to set regular to GL1 of 100, and then the next command says regular is GL2 of 200, and the next one says GL3 of 300. 300 becomes the final result because that's the last thing you've changed it with. So you could actually take this entire script and paste the whole thing into your company, and it should work, but it won't do what you want because you haven't adjusted it properly. So the first section is the simple script where we say if the employee contributes, and that is usually a condition for a match unless it's a safe harbor. And then what we do in here is say, okay, the match is equal to the employee's contribution. So the next thing we say, if the match you've created up here is greater than the eligible earnings times 6%, then make the match eligible earnings times 6%. So basically what that'll say is it will curtail the contribution to eligible earnings by 6%. If this is the method you want to use, you remove or put the comments with the single quotes in front of section 6 and 7. So that's the straightforward one. In this case, this is a little different. It still requires the employee to contribute. So if EE contrib right arrow means greater than 0, then the match equals the employee's contribution. And then over here, they're saying if the match is greater than eligible earnings times 6, we want the match to be equal to the employee's contribution times 6%, a little variation on the math. This one's a little less common, this again being your most dominant or common mechanism for the math. The next section is what we'll call the tiered approach or a staggered approach. And these get interesting because some of them are, they just get a little convoluted. So you may have to take what's here and expand it or reduce it depending upon what the client's requesting. So let me get this a little better positioned on the screen so I can get all of the options here. So I can't even get it on the whole screen. So it's just about, okay, good. So you'll see in this one, it starts at the top, and I've got the little quote with a note that says 1 to 3% matches the employee contribution. So I put some notes in here to kind of explain the logic. And on this case, it's 1 to 3%. If the employee contributes 1 to 3% as a contribution, then the match equals the contribution. So if it's greater than 3% and less than 4%, then do 3.5%. And then I kind of build tables or tiers down to match what the client has told me. A lot of times there'll be 3 or 4 of these. This one's a little longer, and I've seen them longer than this, where they've got specific numbers to match each percent with up to a certain number. So 1% is 1, 2 is 2, 3, something along that line. Most often, or the most common, 1 through 3%, they usually match 100%, and a lot of them are 4 and 5%, match half of that, and then anything over 5% gets matched at 4%. So there's a bunch of limits on that. So as you're dealing with what people are asking you, you have to work out a table that is reflective of what they're asking you to do. So you may have to alter these, eliminate some of them, and change some of them. So in here, you'll notice we have a greater than. So employee contribution has to be greater than 0, and the employee percentage is less than or equal to 3. So when you're dealing with condition statements like this that have less than and equal to, your next condition has to be greater than that number. So we're saying everything up to 3. Down here, we're saying anything immediately above 3. So you have to be careful with your greater than versus your greater than and equal to, and your less than and your less than and equal to. Otherwise, you can overlap. So it's where these are a little fun. So once we've chosen section 5, 6, or 7, then we get into our options. And over here, the first one is there a year-to-date match limit? How much actually will the company allow them to match? And a lot of times this is dependent on how the match is written. And for example, if you're dealing with a one that's 50% of your contribution up to 6%, once you reach your 401k limit, you don't have a contribution, therefore you will not have a match because the conditions say you have to have a contribution. Some of them do not, so a lot of times you'll put a year-to-date match limit in here, and they'll match more aggressively, and the employee will get to the year-to-date limit quicker. So there can be conditions where this will be necessary. So this is based, again, on the questions that you asked the client in the beginning, one of them being, is there a year-to-date match limit? If there is, you simply need to put in what the number is. It is not consistent company to company, and then that's all you need to do. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, if you're maintaining these things, then the client, if it changes, the script will need to be updated possibly every year. So that is the only thing you would need to do if the company has a year-to-date match limit. If they have a year-to-date match limit, they probably are not going to have a month-to-date limit, but it's within the realm of possibility. I've only done a couple of these in the last too many years to mention, so it's infrequent, and it's also a little convoluted on how you do it, so I thought I would put it in here because it's a little more intriguing and it shows a little more of some of the things you can do with scripting. So, for example, in this case, this is a month-to-date. You can only match $250 a month. But in order to figure out a number of things about this, we have a different set of commands in here. The get check date, which is the check date of the check, this will display the year. What is the month? What is the current month amount? And there's a whole bunch of logic going on in here to see what the current month amount is, and then what's coming in on the check, and how to control it through the limit. So if you are in fact dealing with someone that has a month-to-date limit, this is a very smart section to simply cut and paste and put the month-to-date limit in it. This stuff is all working. Other thing that would need to be changed is these year-to-date months, these EY month amount. You've seen a couple of lines in the script where we are using the actual earnings code, like up on top here. If I'll just slide back up. Let me pop up a little more. This is where this thing is enormous. So we're actually in here saying we want to use ER match. So if your code is 4K ER or match, you would have to alter this accordingly. I actually have a way of changing all of that too, but I didn't put it in here. So if anyone's interested in it, I can talk to you at points after that. So typically, if you have a year-to-date match, you won't have a month-to-date match. If you have a month-to-date match, you probably won't have a year-to-date match, so you may need to get rid of one section or the other. Next situation is based on the employee's tenure. This is pretty common. The employee has to be there a year, 6 months, etc. We don't have a great mechanism to say, okay, you've been here a year, and okay, there was a leap year and all that kind of stuff, leap years and that kind of thing. Do throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in things. People who are hired on February 29th of a leap year, things get problematic. So we define, or we assume, that every year is 365 days. So in here, we use this get check date command, which is to determine what's the check date of the payroll that you're running. This command to go in and get the hire date from the eInfo table, which is the hire date from their field. And then it does simple math saying how many days are there between when they were hired and the check date. LOS standing for length of service. If they've been here less than 365 days, it sets the match to 0. Now, through the last 6 or 7 tiers of this, we've been telling it, okay, if it's this, do the match, and if it's that, do the match, and if it's that. We're continually telling the system how to refine the match. So as you move down the script, what you did 2 pages above could be changed by this based on their tenure. So that's why the order of events is critical, so the sections must be kept in order. The next item is they must be 21 years or older. So we could determine the birth date by the eInfo value of birth date from their, whatever it is, position it's on the demographics tab, I believe. Get the check date, and we do a simple math formula again. Their age is their check date minus the birth date. Then we do a cool little formula that says create their age in years, do a little math, divide their age, which is this value, by 365, round it to 2, and that comes up with a number. We also have another one that says if age is less than 7665, anybody who has a calculator can divide that by 365 and come up with 21, and then set the match to 0 if they're less than 21. So you do a series of commands to qualify how the calc works. Then you do the calc and actually come up with the match, and then you refine it by, okay, you don't get the match because you're too young, you don't get the match because you haven't worked here long enough, etc., and so forth. So so we're down to this point, and I've put a couple of, this is another sample of some message boxes. If you're not getting results, you might want to, this will display a note that says the length of service is less than 365, there is no match, or the employee is in 21, so there's no match. So you can at least have a note on the screen that, okay, I've got logic in there preventing it, because you'll be looking at the screen saying, why don't I have a match? This looks fine, but you're actually in the script telling it they don't get one. So, okay, the last section, which is optional, is the discretionary match, or what I wrote said some employees do not get the match. You get this often enough. And what we do is, for those of you in M3, we have the custom, the checkboxes on the Employee Miscellaneous tab. So on the company setup, on the custom user fields, you can define one of the 5 checkboxes in M3. Let me pop back over there real quick. So over here is the sky blue. So we might say in here, gets match. And we save that, and if we go to an employee, and I go to their miscellaneous tab, which is the they get the match. What the script is looking at for the presence or absence of a checkbox. So to computers that deal with checkbox, a checked box is a 1, a blank box is a 0. So if I go back to my Word doc, down here I use check field checkbox 2 but all you need to do is choose which checkbox it is and then change this to match that number. There's 5 of them, so it's mischeck 1 through 5. Now, so what this is saying is no gets. I'm sorry, I'm from New York. That's the way we talk. So, hey, no gets the match. So if this box is checked. So there's a rule here that says if this field, which we've defined as the miscellaneous check on the Employee Miscellaneous tab, is a 1, which means it's checked, then the match is 0. So this is a person who does not get the match. You can do it the other way and say if that box is checked, then they do get the match. Or you would say in this case, if this box is 0, then they get the match. So, or the match is 0. So again, that's up to you as far as how you want to approach the logic. So these are all, when I get to this point, it's pretty much, this incorporates the majority of the requests that I've gotten over the years as to, hey, I want a script that does this, that, and that. So that is why we've got 12 sections to determine what the script is going to do. So it's a long it's not a long process, because once you're familiar with it and you get the answers to your questions from the client, you can simply eliminate all the sections you don't need very quickly. Now the last piece of the equation is, okay, we're done. We have done all of the math. We've done the math, we've determined who gets it, we've trimmed it, we've limited it, etc. And now we're ready to apply it to the payroll. So there's 2 ways to do it, and that really is dependent upon if you want the 401k match to go to an agency. So if there is no agency payment involved, you would use Section 13 and you would get rid of Section 14. If there is an agency involved, you would get rid of Section 13 and you would use Section 14, and the item that needs to be updated, as the notes say here, is in this command that says set accounts, and it says Schwab. If you recall from my 401k wizard, Schwab was the name of the 401k agency payment check. So I would put that in here. So after the script has gone through and determined all of these things, it does 2 things. In either section, it adds the transaction. The transaction, add transaction function is a way to add a line to a check. So if you don't have a script and you pay an employee 40 hours, it looks at their deductions and calculates deductions. It looks at their taxes and calculates taxes. It looks at anything that you've entered on the payroll screen, and it calculates deductions and other earnings based on the presence of calc codes, which are scripts, but we're not discussing those today, or a 401k match. So in the transaction, this is the last thing that gets done to the check, because our calculation at the very top said post-check calculation. So, all right, Millennium, calculate the whole check, and after you're done with all that, go through and do all this stuff. And then if I don't have an agency payment, I'm simply telling it I want Millennium to add a transaction that is an earnings. The actual earn code is ER match. This field where it says zeros is an hours field, and the next field is the amount field. So we're saying add a transaction to the check that says E for ER match the code, no hours, and the dollar amount as determined by all of this math above it. If I have an agency, the exact same logic applies, except that I do this little trick to allow it to insert the agency value. So I'm not going to get into all the gory details of this. The intention, again, is to have something that you can very easily work with. So if you have an agency, just be aware of what the agency name is from the agency check tab on the company and type the code in right here. And that is the end of the ball game as far as that. So, okay, I'm going to see how good this all works in our company. Dora, how are we doing on time?
We're doing well. We have another 29 minutes.
Oh, God, I can't take it. Just kidding.
You have time to do the group exercise and stuff with them.
Oh, okay. All right. Now, are we going to do push-ups or jumping jacks?
You want to take a break?
No, I'm in the zone. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. You are.
Okay. All right. So let's see who's been paying attention. So I'm going to paste my script in here. First thing you do, you type in here the word pay. Again, I am typing challenged. Because I don't really need them. So let me just get rid of all that. And almost there. Bear with. Over here, this word goes here, paycheck calculator. Now, tell me, as an experienced group of Millennium users, what does this button do? It does another line, which says, I can type in here, I want to do script number 2. And when I first looked at M3, I was like, oh, cool, I can set up an individual script and have descriptions of what it does and all that kind of crap. And then I found out that's all a bunch of nonsense. There is only one entry allowed on this screen, and it must read a code of paycheck calc and a description of paycheck calculator. If it says paycheck calculator for 401k match, it says something else over here. If it says paycheck calculator, that's what has to be here. Any other exceptions will cause it to, whatever term you use, for not work properly. Okay, so I've added this script. What's the first mistake I made? Back in the day, I had said, if you put a script in and you leave this in here, they both will calculate. So I don't want this 401k match anymore. So there's no delete over here. Can't get rid of it. So how do we get rid of it? Another trick you must use, because you will, in several cases, use the match wizard, set it up, client will get their stuff, this is all wrong, you didn't do this, and that would be because you didn't ask them the questions you should have asked them, or they answered them incorrectly. So you should always be on the side of the ledger that says you answered the questions incorrectly, so your sense of urgency isn't motivating me. I'm always, the reason for the questions and the reason for the examples of the math is to cover your butt. It's as simple as that. It's okay, you told me to do it that way. If it's wrong, I will fix it for you, but you have no cause to yell at me. So part of my mechanism is I don't like being yelled at. I like to be on the right side of the equation on that, so that's why, again, I keep harping on asking those questions. It saves you also having to call them back saying, hey, what about this, what about that? You can get this stuff done quicker. So because I've decided I need a script, I need to get rid of this entry. So the best way to do that is to go back here and simply click the next button until you get to the point of decision making where you say, I want to generate a VBScript. And we'll click this button and we'll click next, and it will generate a VBScript, which in some cases you can actually copy and paste into that scripting section and manipulate. I don't like the way some of these get written, so I typically don't use them, but this is pretty similar to what I did in some cases. But my intent in here is to get rid of the internal match. So on this screen, when we first did it, I chose use the internal match. Now I'm saying I want to use generate VBScript, which means I do not want to use the internal. So I click next. If I was going to copy this, I can very simply just highlight this with the mouse, right-click, copy, etc. I don't need it because we've already written the script from the other exercise. So I click next. It tells me what I need to do. Bada bing, it is gone. If I hadn't done this, when the payroll ran, I would have multiple calculations for the match in place. So let's see how good this script worked without touching it. And now I have not looked at this company, so there might be a few things we need to set up. Let's see what we got in here. And Darla, are the phones open? I heard chuckling before. Did you? Oh, okay. So,
want me to unmute him?
Well, let me finish up here.
Okay.
Now, if you recall, I mentioned message boxes, and this is what a message box from a script looks like. Excuse me. So it's displaying some of those entries from. If I get back to the script itself, in this section where I have all these message boxes, these guys I was talking about, and then I've got some other ones down here. They're showing up. They show up as it gets to that part of the script. So they're also useful when the script doesn't work. It's like, why isn't this thing working? I'll just put a message box in it to see where it fails, because it will work up to a certain point, and then a message box won't show up. So another trick of the trade. So I've got an error, and this is where, when you're using somebody else's test company, the things are different. So in Darla's company, my script says I want to add the earning code ER match. If you remember from the bottom, we had a instruction that said call add transaction ER match. That's the earning code it wants to use, but ER match does not exist on this company. So that is why it is erroring out at that point. So that's a pretty easy fix. I can go to the company, and I can add an ER match, or I can look at what she has, and she's got match. So what I can do to my script is down at the very bottom is come back in here. And so what that error was alluding to was down here at the very bottom. I am saying right here, add a transaction called ER match, that's the earning code. Well, it won't let you, because of the way the database is organized and what we call the object model logic behind it, it doesn't let you add stuff that doesn't exist at the company level. It's cross-referential integrity. We don't want you inserting stuff that doesn't exist. So now I've changed the script to match the company itself. I can save it. I can back arrow over to where I was, and you'll notice my error is gone. Now, nothing's working, and so now I've got to figure out why. So now the last thing I had mentioned, sometimes scripts just can tick you off because you're like looking at what you've done and it's not working. One of the most important skills in scripting, and I guess in payroll in general, is the ability to look at what you've done and then see what you did wrong. And sometimes it's just daunting. I'm like, what on God's earth or other expletives am I doing wrong? So I use this end of, and if you want to see the scripting again, you simply hit the refresh on the screen, and it will rerun the check calculation, and it will rerun the script. So right here, I've got a note that says it's end of script. So actually what that means to me is, okay, it's going through the whole script. So what is going on is the question that I need to figure out while we're talking. So let's see if on other employees. Now here's where I hate message boxes, because in order to get off the screen, I click OK. And if I want to add a line to this check just to check something out, you notice it's running the script all the time, so these message boxes come up, and a few times you will call it less than choice names because it's annoying. So every time I change the check, I get a message box. So everything has its pros and cons. So if I hit the plus key, let's see what we got here. I have to look at a number of things on this to see what is going on with this. But we've got a 401k, so I should be able to get this thing to work pretty quickly. So while I'm moseying around the company, why don't you, if people have questions, okay, so here's the first problem. Everybody, can anyone talk and respond to questions? If you look at my document, what's missing from this tab? This is the code groups tab. I have two important code groups.
4KDD.
What was that?
The 4KDD code group.
Okay, that's the $300 gift card. Oh, I forgot to tell you there was $300 gift cards. Okay, so yes. So because that does not exist, one of the things with a script is it doesn't tell you, it doesn't say, dude, you didn't put the cal code in here. It's like, oh well. So basically what it's saying, when it's doing all the math, I've told it the employee contribution is the amount of this code group. Well, this code group doesn't exist, so the amount of the contribution would therefore be 0. So every calculation that says if the employee's contribution is greater than 0, do this, it's all failing because the contribution doesn't exist, so it is translated to be 0. So once again, proving my flawless logic that you should do your setup before you do your scripting. So I kind of badger about these points for the simple fact I have screwed these things up so much that, okay, now we've got a 401k. So that's good. Let me look at a couple other things while I'm at this. And is there any questions? I know that this was a lot of stuff. So my question is simply that. Is there any questions in particular you have about what I went over? Did I go too quickly on some things, etc.? All right. So, well, I'm still going to keep tinkering. Or was this just the most flawless presentation you've ever heard? And oh my God, I just can't wait to go script. Mm-hmm. No comments at all, huh? All right.
Dennis,
so I'm going to do.
There are a couple of questions in the chat panel, but do you want to wait until the answer?
Yeah. Let me just hack this stuff out of here and see if what we get here.
Okay.
Get rid of that. Bear with me a second, please. Oh, well, that's another reason why some stuff isn't working, because I changed the code. Why didn't you tell me that, Darla? I'm going to fix this here. So now, in order to make it actually work, get rid of that error, I changed the code from ER match to match. So now I've got to alter some of this. So bear with a second while I scroll through the 85,000 other lines of this stuff. I don't want. Do I want this? I don't want a month-to-date match. So I'm using my quotes. Just remember the quotes. If I don't want this to be used, I just put a quote at the beginning of each line in this section, and it is ignored. I wish I could do this to my kids. Here, put a quote in front of you. All right, let's see. Slow it down here. That should work. Hire date, employee's got to be that. Age is that. We'll get rid of that real quick. That one. We'll get rid of that one. See, because we have this in here too. So we have so many things in here in play that. All right. Let's see if that works. All right. Employee's age is 40 points. All right. Okay. So let's refresh this thing here. I got to go through it one more time. Everyone's going, this doesn't work. I don't know what you're talking about, Dennis. So let me just check one more thing, and then I'm going to give up embarrassingly. But two things. I always do my testing. I have a company, probably if you've looked at SB 107, there's a DPD demo out there. You should have your own test company to do all your work in, because that is yours exclusively. For example, the ABC test company in SB 107 is, so many people have done stuff to it that the results in there are often unpredictable. So I would recommend, if you're going to be doing this on any level of frequency, that you have a test company that you can work in so that you know what to expect. Because, not picking on Darla, but this was her test company. I unfortunately didn't look at it, so that's why I'm having some of the results I have. So I'm blaming everything on Darla, in case that wasn't obvious. And I'm going to get rid of this for a moment, and then I'll figure this out probably by Tuesday at this pace. And then I'm going to go over to your questions real quick. Let me just see what else we got here. I got that. Oh, might need that. No, I don't need that. All right, and then let's go to the questions. Well, let's see if that worked, so I can just stop frustrating with. Yes.
Hey, your match was ER match. At the very end. Your match in the script still said ER match in there.
Oh, really? But now, okay, well, that's good. See, because one of the problems with doing this is you got to keep. I'm going quickly, and I'm rushing, and then there's like 800 sets of eyes. Now, okay, but yeah, but look at what's there. So that's actually not being used.
Oh, you're right.
Right. All right. So, but good call. That's part of what you've got to get used to in this whole thing. So let me do this. Let me pop over to this chat panel thing, wherever the heck it is. There it is. Everyone is unmuted now. Okay. What if the employer has two matches? Oh, Connie, there's ways to do that. That would not fit within the realm of this. I do have scripts, or have one that's got that in there. What you'd have to have, in a nutshell, is you'd have to have the two match codes configured. So whatever it is, match 1, match 2. And you basically do the same math twice. Typically what I'll do is I'll write one of them, and instead of calling it 4KDD 1 and 4KEE, I call them 4KDD1 and 4KDD2, and I put multiples of everything in it so I can have the math for the first one and the math for the second one. The only time they get problematic is when they say, okay, well, they can have two matches, but the total of the match can only equal this. Then you've got to add them up and alter one of the other one if the result of the two you've calculated is greater than the amount they can have per payroll. So I do have a script for that, but that is a very uncommon, or in my experience, it's not that common, so I didn't add that to this. I could appreciate, for anyone who hasn't done this a lot, that this is like, oh my God, this is a lot of stuff. But if you look at it from the way, if you look at that scripting recap, the 14 steps, sounds like an Alcoholics Anonymous program. The 14 steps to error-free scripting is follow the 14 sections. First, get your questions answered. Follow the sections of the Word document. Remove the ones you don't need. Alter the other one. And you should be able to get to where you need to go. All right. So let's see what the next question is. The match script calculation, is it always post-check calculation? Yes, it is. It could be done other ways because typically the match is always a memo, but you have to do it late enough in the equation that everything has been done by the check calculator, so you're working with the right numbers. I've seen people do it actually within deduction calc codes, but I don't like that because you've got to add the calc code to all of the employees, so I don't particularly like that method. And I think that is all of the questions that were in the box. So, and now it says everyone is unmuted. So if you want to ask questions directly, feel free. And I will continue to attempt to figure out why this thing isn't working. Which I know is inspiring great confidence in all of you. Okay, he's teaching the class. He can't get it to work, but how the heck are we supposed to get it to work? Fair question. But carry on. Anybody? How's everybody in Hunt Valley? It's the first time we've had a chance to interact with some of you folks. How's it going?
Good.
Okay. Thank you. So are there any other questions? I know there was a lot to this. There's a couple of ways we can deal with this. You can, Darla's got an exercise for you after the fact, and I don't know what the requirements are on getting that done. If you wish, if you try and use this and you run into questions, you can just always email me. It's dennis@mpay.com, and I can help you out with them. It's one of the things I do at a certain amount of time. Okay, so this is one of the things we need to look at while we're looking here. How old is this employee? They are 43, so they meet that criteria. So let's see here. Well, I want that position. Yeah, that could be why they've only been working. There's always a reason. It's just when you're dealing with something with this much stuff in it. Bingo! Who's the man? Thank you. I have to pat myself on the back here. So, all right. So, Amaze Your Friends at Cocktail Parties with scripting from the stars. It will be newest show replacing Dancing with the Stars. But so it does work, and I did not tailor this ideally to the conditions that were in the company. So, and the message box is actually coming up saying if this person's hasn't worked there a year, it's not going to work. It was kept telling me that, but in my rush to get a fix, I wasn't even reading what it was telling me. So, the message boxes are good. The problem, again, as I said, every time you change something in the check, they pop up. And then you have to click OK and blah, blah, blah. So they're helpful, but when you actually deploy the script, wherever you're going to deploy it, you should remove them or use that single quote, which is the technical term for that is just comment them out. There's other cool terms that they use in development and stuff, but if you don't want it to be considered by the script, you put a comment in front of it. So now that we've actually got this working, and if there's no more questions, I can go over to this miscellaneous tab, and this says they get the match. I guess so. If I turn that off, it should. This actually is. I forgot which one this was. See if it works. Got to look at a couple of things here. I'm a little backwards on this, so okay. I have to look at what I've got set, but I think I had it set to check, so, or I turned the whole thing off because there was not a condition in here. So I know I've rambled on for 85 minutes, and I know you probably have a splitting headache from this, but I appreciate you listening to my spiel. And as I said, if you have questions about how this works, or if you run into a scenario that you have, such as the one Connie came up with that is outside of this realm, I might have one laying around that will fill the bill or do most of it, so please let me know. And if no one has any other questions or comments, then I'll fire back over to Ms. Darla Kuntz.
Thanks, Dennis. And just a little side note, some of those things were intentional.
Yeah, sure.
Those were intentional.
You wanted to see if I actually knew what I was doing? Is that what you're trying to say?
I wanted people to be able to see how you troubleshoot, how you name things different. The hire date wasn't intentional, though.
Yeah. Well, hey, don't start your car tonight. That's all I can tell you. You know? Anyway, so I guess this is the group exercise, right?
No, can you go to the last page, the last slide for me?
Sure.
Just real quick.
That one?
One more. There we go. So, yes, this one. So this is actually a task exercise that each of you will have to complete in the SC00. And you should all be able to log in. You should all have a company out there. I sent that information to all of you at custom, but if you have any problems, let me know. I'd like you to try to have it done by end of day Monday. And once you have it completed, if you can just send an email to myself or training at MPAY, then I can take a look at it. If you have any questions, if you really are having some challenges with it, feel free to give me a call. And that was it. I appreciate Dennis's taking the time out of his busy schedule to go over this 401k scripting with us. And like Dennis said, it can be very, very complicated, but this one size fits all is very, very nice. We've all used it here, and it works really well as long as things are set up correctly.
Yeah, there's that.
Anyway, I don't.
So, all I can tell you is look at the little recap, and then look at what she's got there, and you can probably figure out, okay, I need that one, that one, that one, that one. The questions that you'll have to answer are which one of 5, 6, or 7 do you want, and then of the last two, which one do you want? And then look for the words that she's defined, and okay, do I need that? Do I need that? And you can start removing a good section of it. So.
Well, if you have any questions, again, just send me an email, or I can try to help you with it.
Yay!
Well, again, thank you, Dennis, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day.